Hello and welcome to the latest mega review, where we talk not just about the movie itself, but about everything that went into making the movie what it was. And in this particular review, talking about Aliens 3, we're probably gonna spend more time talking about what went into making it what it was, and what it could have been with some of the earlier drafts. Because quite frankly, the movie itself is so damn boring. The behind the scenes stuff and what it could have been is way more interesting than the movie itself. I certainly wouldn't go as far to say that Alien 3 is one of the biggest disappointments of all time, but for Alien fans, it's hard to imagine a movie that could have been more disappointing than this. Fans waited for 6 years after James Cameron's Aliens to get a sequel and to see this ragtag family unit of Ripley, Hicks and Newt, what new adventures they'd have. And instead we got... We'll get into that. But some of the initial disappointment for this movie had a lot to do with that some of the early trailers made it look like this movie was actually going to be set on Earth.
In 1979, we discovered in space, no one can hear you scream. In 1992, we would discover on Earth, everyone can hear you scream.
But when they went and saw the movie, it turned out to be something very different entirely. The whole movie takes place on a prison colony on some far-flung planet in the galaxy, and Ripley is the only surviving member of the cast. Well, except for a cameo of Bishop. The movie was directed by David Fincher. Yes, that David Fincher. But before he had made any of those movies, so he didn't yet have the reputation, he didn't yet have the street cred necessary to throw his weight around, do battle with the corporate executives and fight back against their insane level of interference. And the level of interference in this movie is off the charts. This was basically Fantastic before Fantastic. Maybe even worse. Fincher doesn't like to talk about it. He's basically disowned the entire movie. They've tried to get him back to do like director's commentaries on DVDs and Blu-rays, and he just wants to have nothing to do with the project. But some of the few times where he has talked about it, he said it was a complete nightmare. Every day that he would appear on sets, the script had been rewritten, more corporate interference than wanting to change characters, change storylines. It was just a maddening situation for him to be in. All things considered, it's amazing the movie actually turned out as good as it is, but as a result we now have two different versions. We have the theatrical version, which came out upon the movie's release, and after 2003 we got what was referred to as the special edition or the assembly cut. Notice it's not called the director's cut because he doesn't want to have anything to do with it, so the assembly cut has an extra 30 minutes worth of material and some fairly significant changes to the story. But as with most of these director's cut kind of things, they don't go on to fix the fundamental flaws with the problems, they just sort of polish up the edges. A significant change made was the alien itself. Although, despite the fact that they went to all the effort of actually getting HR Giga back to come up with some new designs for a new alien, they, in the end, only really used one of them, which is a huge shame because they asked Giga to come up with a new kind of alien that was birthed from an animal, so had different characteristics, and they wanted him to make it more puma-like, more sleek and fast-moving, but also more sexualized. And for those of you who've seen my Alien Mega review, you'll know that Giga's work is already kinda sexualized, so telling him to do that is like enabling his weirdness. Part of his design was it was going to have sort of human-like lips, and it would go up and kiss its victims, then shove its tongue down their throat and rip out their innards. I'm actually kind of glad they never ended up making that, because Giga weirds me out enough. I don't need to see that on film. But the version they ended up going with was the chestburster version of this puma-like xenomorph, that in the theatrical version is birthed out of a dog, but in the assembly cut is actually birthed out of an ox. But they called this the Bambi burster because it walks on all fours, kind of does look a little bit like Bambi, and it just sort of scuttles off. And then when it sheds its skin and grows much bigger, it was going to become the puma-like creature. But due to corporate interference and just general laziness on their part, they just took that Bambi version and made it bigger. What a waste. What a waste. This might actually be part of the reason why the xenomorph never really seems that much bigger, even though it definitely should be if you go with the assembly cut that it's birthed out of an ox. If it was birthed out of an ox, shouldn't it be like a big hulking xenomorph? It should probably look more like a bear. I mean, the xenomorphs we see birthed from humans are like 7 feet tall, so if it's birthed from an ox, it should be at least like 8 or 9 feet tall and just hulking, right? But no, it looks small and tiny, but then other times it for some reason looks big. I don't know. I don't understand it either. It's just one of the many things that doesn't work in this movie. But David Fincher was a big fan of Ridley Scott's Alien movie, not so much James Cameron's movie, so he decided to go with Ridley Scott's more suspenseful monster hidden in a horror house kind of thing that he did. Sigourney Weaver, with her strong anti-gun feelings that we saw in the Aliens mega review, was the one behind the reasons why this prison has no weapons of any kind.
This is a maximum security prison, and you have no weapons of any kind?
But Fincher never really succeeded in recapturing the same kind of atmosphere that Alien had. And when you combine that with the fact that the studio was actually banking on this movie to make a whole ton of money, which really doesn't make a lot of sense, because while the first two movies certainly did well, they were never what you would consider to be like giant, big blockbuster movies. They just didn't bring in that kind of money because they're horror movies. You've got a limited age range for horror movies, and generally more guys show up to horror movies than girls, so you always have a smaller audience. The fact that they thought they could make blockbuster money with this was just a really, really bizarre choice, but then the studios made plenty of bizarre choices with this, which is a big part of why David Fincher despises the film to this very day. So the movie starts out with a crash landing by Ripley's ship due to alien shenanigans, we'll get more into that later, upon which Hicks is killed, Newt is killed, Bishop is smashed almost beyond repair, leaving Ripley the only survivor. Wow, way to kick people right in the junk on the very first scene. In fact, even before the first scene, it happens in the title sequence. To me, that's unforgivable. That's absolutely unforgivable. As I've said, we all wanted to see this ragtag family unit come together and maybe build a life together. Instead, they all get wiped out except Ripley, and off screen for a lot of them. This really, really stuck in the side of a lot of fans, and Michael Biehn himself was very upset with this. So much so that he ended up suing them for using his likeness in the movie. He later on regretted this because he didn't know at the time David Fincher was going to become an amazing director. He since has said if he knew David Fincher was going to become such a great director, he would never have caused all that problem. He would have let them use his likeness for free, just as long as David Fincher puts him in one of his upcoming movies. Yeah, Michael Biehn, you could have been Tyler Durden, but not gonna happen now. So after Ripley wakes up, she finds out that she's on this space colony, which is a prison colony. But for some reason, all of the inmates are really religious, and they've all got shaved heads because of some lice that's going through, which makes it very difficult to tell a lot of these characters apart. Most of them are not memorable in the least anyway, and the fact that they all have shaved heads makes it even more difficult. But a facehugger that's stowed away in the pod latches itself onto a dog in the theatrical cut, and gives birth to a new xenomorph. The warden sends a message to Weyland-Yutani that Ripley's here, and they say they're on their way to collect her. The new xenomorph then runs around and kills a bunch of people, and once Ripley finds out about it, she convinces all the rest of the prisoners to make a stand and trap the alien because the company's coming to get them, and she knows the company just wants them for research purposes, so she talks them into killing it before they get here, and she also discovers that she herself has been impregnated with a queen alien, and she eventually sacrifices herself so that Weyland-Yutani can never get their hands on the xenomorph ever again. Unless, of course, they decide to clone her and make her half xeno, half human. That could then lead to some weird human-alien hybrid alien, but come on, that's not gonna happen. I guess the problem with this story is, for one thing, it's really slow and it's really dull in some points, especially considering that you don't really care about any of the characters. But most importantly, at no point is the movie ever actually scary. Never. When you got a horror movie that doesn't instill horror in you, you know you've really messed up. There's also a serious misstep between Ripley's reaction to Hicks and Newt being killed versus the audience reaction, because all of us fans from Aliens, we love those characters. Yet Ripley here, upon waking up, it's a really long time before she even asks about the others. When she finds out, she cries once and then she immediately turns around the very next day, mind you. The very next day, and has sex with some other guy. Wow, just come on, you're not even gonna mourn Hicks? I know you never even kissed him before, but come on, there was a connection there. You're not even gonna mourn that? Some people have tried to make the argument that killing off Hicks and Newt in the very beginning of the movie is actually a good move because it's kind of shocking, like Game of Thrones, like anyone can die in this. Even the main character, and I guess the main character does die. But look, just because it's unexpected doesn't mean it's good. It would have been unexpected if the xenomorph starts tap dancing down the hallways, but that doesn't mean it would be a good decision to make. Not only does it trample on people's expectations from the last movie, but it also shafted hope for future movies. For example, Sigourney Weaver was kind of okay with Ripley dying in this movie as she's giving up her life to finally wipe out this species once and for all, because the Queen inside her is the very last one. And she thought that was a good end for Ripley's character and sort of rounded out her story, and it certainly is. Then why couldn't they have done something where maybe both Hicks and Ripley give their lives and then Newt is the sole survivor, and then maybe Newt could have continued on in the Alien franchise, maybe go and meet the space jockeys, you could start a whole new story with that. The point is there was lots of potential, so much potential, and it was just all completely squandered. The journey leading up to this movie being made was an incredibly rocky road with lots of twists and turns in it. First, it was going to be a space station built for scientific research that they come into contact with, and the movie was going to surround Hicks, leaving Ripley and Newt asleep for the entire movie in their cryo chambers. This was again still because of this whole notion that more guys like these movies than women, so they didn't think they could have a woman lead. So it would have centered around Hicks trying to prevent Weyland-Yutani from starting an alien empire in a way. Then the story got changed again, where Ripley, Hicks and Newt were actually going to find planets related more closely to the space jockeys, to the engineers, part of which would include almost a whole planet that was covered in xenomorphs. But it was deemed that would be way too expensive to make, so the script changed again to it being set on Earth, which led to that misleading trailer. Then that got scrapped again, and it was going to be another just Hicks solo movie on a prison colony. Then that got scrapped, and then it was going to be this whole story about this floating space base that was like a planet made out of wood, and it was inhabited by this order of religious monks. This was the version that sort of progressed along the most before the movie that we now got. It was going to star Ripley with the other two in cryosleep, coming into contact with this colony, and of course she's the only woman there in this order of monks, so it brings in temptation, and a lot of those themes sort of carried over into the actual Aliens 3 movie.
What brother means to say is we view the presence of any outsider, especially a woman, as a violation of the harmony, potential break in the spiritual unity.
You see, we've got a good place to wait here. And until now, no temptation.
But that movie was going to have these more religious themes that when the xenomorph pops up, the monks were going to think that she brought this demon with her. And the story was going to culminate with her having a chestburster inside her that the monks managed to extract through this ancient ritual that pulls it back up out of her mouth, so she would then be the only person to actually survive having a chestburster inside her. I think I might have actually enjoyed that. Some of the designs for this world were actually really intricate and really thought-provoking about what kind of society they were going to build here. The problems they ran into, though, was how do you explain why this society is even here? How did it get here? What purpose does it serve? Who funded it? All those kind of questions in the story, nobody really had an answer to. So we eventually got them taking the ideas of a prison colony and a monk colony, throwing them together in Aliens 3, but also saying it's sort of a mining base, which explains why it's there. And rather than keeping Hicks and Newt in cryosleep, they just killed them off. Voila! Aliens 3. So as you can see, there was so many different versions of what this movie could have been, and in the end we kind of got the crappiest version possible. I would have taken any of the other versions as opposed to what we got. One of the most intriguing aspects of this movie, which was completely cut out of both the theatrical version and the assembly cut, is the concept of a new type of facehugger, a royal facehugger, which you only see once in the movie. But this was to be a special kind of facehugger that can produce queens. It's birthed from an egg which is supposed to be sort of like an emergency egg to kickstart the species again if it's facing some kind of catastrophic disaster like Ripley flamethrowing all the eggs. And this facehugger is bigger than the usual one, it's got extra armor on it, it has a bladed tail much like the xenomorph, and even a secondary jaw, so it's built much more for defense as well. And it's also capable of impregnating not just one person but two people. One with a seed that makes a queen and another with a seed which makes a warrior, which can serve as a kind of protector for the queen as it's gestating, as I assume it takes a bit longer for the queen to gestate and mature before it can burst out than it would a warrior. But this explains in Alien 3 why not only Ripley has an alien inside her, but the dog/ox did as well. It's interesting because not only does it expand out this lore of giving like the queen and the aliens this extra ability, it also opens up this whole realm of where did this egg come from? How did it get inside the Sulaco? And there's a couple of different theories on this. One theory is that the queen left it there. The problem with that theory though is that we do see the queen break away from her egg layer pouch. So for this theory to work, it would mean that she would have to have like one royal egg, like maybe stored in her belly that she could just lay, like an emergency egg with the royal facehugger, which is definitely plausible. So presumably between the moment when Ripley left the cargo hold and when she came back with the power loader, that would have been the time when the Queen ran off and stashed the egg. Only problem is, the Queen never left the cargo bay. She was hiding in the wheel underneath the dropship lands in the cargo bay, and she never leaves that cargo bay. She fights Ripley there, then she gets sucked out into space. The egg that we see in the beginning of Alien 3 is deep inside the Sulaco, so the Queen could never have done that herself, and so I don't believe that theory. Other people believe that Burke must have been behind it. We all know that Burke, in the movie Aliens, exposed both Ripley and Newt to facehuggers because he wanted to get it through quarantine and back to Earth so he could sell it. So he's certainly not above stashing an egg somewhere in the Sulaco. I mean, he would do something crazy like that. It just doesn't make any sense that he would have time to go and get an egg from the nest somewhere and fly back up to the ship and stash it. I mean, he was dead before he even got back to the ship. So it couldn't really have been him either. So by process of elimination, it really comes down to one person who must have done it. Bishop. Bishop had both the opportunity and perhaps even the motivation, depending on what kind of programming he might have had, to do this. Remember, he was crawling through the pipe to get outside so that he could call down the second dropship. Perhaps along the way he could have just walked into the nest and grabbed a royal egg out of something. Since he is an android, he might have been able to just walk right in there and get it without the xenomorphs paying any attention to him. And then once he gets the dropship, perhaps the real reason that he was late picking Ripley up was because he was flying back up to the mothership to leave the egg and had to fly back down again. This would explain maybe why the Queen actually targeted him in the cargo bay. Maybe she saw him take one of the eggs, so was getting some payback. This theory even kind of lines up with the fact that Hicks had to be sedated.
In 19 minutes, this area is going to be a cloud of vapor the size of Nebraska.
Hicks, don't let him leave.
We ain't going anywhere.
He's going to be all right. He's just out. I had to give him another shot for the pain.
Maybe Hicks wouldn't let him leave, so he sedated him so that he could fly up there, stash the egg, and then fly back again. Now granted, we all kind of like Bishop because he's like a good android, he's not an evil android like Ash, but he is a machine. Who knows, maybe Burke actually tampered with his programming, maybe Burke put something in his head to tell him to go and get the egg. But it's certainly a very interesting part of the Aliens lore, this idea of this royal facehugger, this royal egg. I like it a lot, and I hope at some point we do see it come back again. So next week we got the Amazing Spider-Man mega review. It did actually end up losing the vote, but it was so neck and neck, I just went with the one I wanted. I just wanted to mix it up. I didn't want to focus on Spider-Man all the time. So yeah, sorry, I turned into a dictator last week and ignored the results of the election. But that seems to be all in style nowadays. So yeah, the Amazing Spider-Man, that will be the mega review for next week. So when all's said and done, Alien 3 did disappoint a lot of people, but it also has a weirdly vocal kind of fan base. There's a lot of people out there who feel like they can really understand the vision that David Fincher was trying to do, and who knows, if he had been left to his own devices to actually pursue that vision without being harassed by all these idiots around him, we might have got a really, really good ending for this trilogy of films. I certainly would have liked to have seen it, but sadly, fate would not have it. Whether you're a lover or a hater of Alien 3, it definitely stands as a missed opportunity. And to me, it just seems kind of weird and awkwardly out of place for the franchise, and it does stand for the moment at which the franchise lost its way, and even now, has not found its way back again. Who knows? Maybe it will someday though. So I hope you enjoyed this. Click on any of the stuff you see here to watch more videos from me. I am Bandit, this is Bandit Incorporated. Until next time, I will see you guys in the comments.